So Nehemiah, day 2 of our 4 days through the book. Today we read chapters 4 to 7. And I want to read chapter 4 verse 14 to you and then express to you kind of what I saw in that today. It really stood out for me. This is in the context of Nehemiah and the people now who he's all gathered together as one in Jerusalem. They have now begun to rebuild the walls, and immediately there's opposition. There's this guy Tobiah the Ammonite with a bunch of the other people that he's got around him that now are bringing opposition, various types of opposition. First of all, they tried to discourage them and say, this work will never work, this thing you're doing. But when they see that doesn't work, then they actually threaten them with physical violence. And it's in response to that threat of being attacked that the following verse then speaks. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. So there's two bits of advice in that great charge that he gives to the people. He says, first of all, remember the Lord. Remember the Lord in all of the opposition that you face to your dream, your vision, your family. Remember the Lord. He is great and awesome. You may feel powerless. You may feel like I can't do anything against this threat that's threatening us. Yes, but God can. He is great and He is awesome. Remember the Lord in all your troubles. But then secondly, fight. Fight for your brethren, your brothers and sisters, in whatever sense that is. This in the sense of being fellow Jews. Fight for those in the kingdom with you. And then your own family. Fight for your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Fight. Fight for what you have. Fight for what God has given you. And it really spoke to me this morning that there's this dual role that we play. There is, first of all, trusting in God with all our struggles. But then there is this call to arms. There is this fighting. The kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and those who take it by force, Jesus said. If you want to get somewhere in the kingdom, it's going to require forcefulness. It's going to require fighting for what you have. And Paul says, of course, that our wrestle is not against flesh and blood. It's against principalities and powers and the rulers of this dark world. We have a spiritual enemy named Satan, and we must resist him. We must fight against him. We must fight against the ungodliness that is in this world. We must fight for the freedom of the church. We must fight against the sin that pervades, like the fight against abortion is a good one, and it is one that the church must carry on. We must fight for what is right. And all the while remember that the battle is the Lord's, not ours, but we fight. And so, in the light of that charge to fight, I want to remind you of the 6 threats that Nehemiah and the people who were with him faced in this short reading that we've had so far. The first threat was the threat of discouragement. You may look at the current state of affairs as they did. I mean, the place was so full of rubbish they could hardly even move to try to get to the wall. There was just trash lying everywhere. And this was a great discouragement. And then their enemies, Tobiah and those evil enemies, were saying, look at the state of things, man, you'll never get anywhere. And this wall that you built, even if a fox climbs up on it, the fox will knock the whole thing down. That's how feeble this wall is. You might feel discouraged, my friend, as you look at the state of affairs around you. Maybe you look at the state of your family and you just think, man, the current state of affairs, there is no hope. Things are so bad. The vision I have, what I'd love to see, is so far from what it is now. It's just too far. I can't do it. You need to fight against discouragement. Remember the Lord. He is great and awesome. I don't care how bad things are around you right now. He can do it. Number 2, the threat of physical violence. And that was the immediate context of his words there. And, I live in a country, South Africa, where we do live with this constant fear or this constant threat of physical violence. This is probably the most violent country in the world. It's got the highest murder rates, got, if not the highest, one of the highest rape rates in the world. And this is the country in which we live, in which we are raising our sons and daughters. And you look around you, you may fear physical violence. It may even be that you have been the victim of physical violence. And yet, here we hear the charge of Nehemiah. Remember the Lord. He is great and awesome, and He is able to protect you. Now, I'm obviously not saying we must fight physically, although you have a right to defend yourself and your family if you have to. But we must fight this thing in prayer. We must fight the battle as far as doing everything we can to keep our families safe. You must use common sense, secure your property, do what you can to keep your family safe from physical violence, and yet remember the Lord. He is great and awesome. Now, if you have suffered physical violence in your life, first of all, I want you to know that I am very sorry that happened to you. And I can't explain why God allows all the things that He does. Every now and again, God does allow something horrible to happen. And there is mystery in that. And it'll only be on that final day when the kingdom comes and all evil is wrapped up and judged, that those who perpetrated the wickedness against you will be judged. Their day is coming. And on that day, you will understand why the Lord allowed it. And I hope that you can reach that point if you have been the victim of something. Then, number 3, there is the threat of ungodliness in the midst of the people of God themselves. In this case, the threat was that of oppression and usury. So he finds out that whereas 14 years earlier they had been intermarrying, that was the sin that Ezra dealt with. Now Nehemiah's got to deal with a new sin amongst the people, and they're charging interest. And the Bible said, the law said, they were not to charge interest of their Jewish brethren. But here they are. There's people that have been kicked off their inheritances. They can't even live on their own land anymore, which God had given them, because their own Jewish brothers and sisters, some very shrewd Jewish businessmen, were now loaning money at exorbitant interest rates and getting wealthy from it. And Nehemiah has to now deal with this ungodliness, this unlawfulness in the midst of his own people. And I'm telling you, this is a challenge that we face, even as Christian fathers and Christian mothers, parents of our home. One of the things you're going to have to fight for is the godliness of your home, and make sure that you do not allow sin into it. I know this is one of the most difficult battles that I face as a father, that I cannot allow ungodliness into my home. I have to maintain a certain level of purity. While you can't make everyone in your family do what you want them to do, obviously, there are certain decisions you can take. For example, our kids have, I've got an 18-year-old, 16-year-old, 14-year-old. They have in the past asked to have a party at our house, like all their friends have parties at their houses. And I know what happens at those parties. A lot of drinking, a lot of drunkenness, and probably a bunch of kind of sexual activity to one degree or another happening in the bushes of your garden. And we have steadfastly and firmly said, no, you will not do that in our home. And even for our daughter who's 18 now, we have said there is going to be no drinking parties, no drinking games, that sort of thing in our home. If you want to do that, that's your choice. You are becoming an adult. You must make your own decisions, but it will not happen in our home. Now, there are some parents who look at that and say, no, but come on, it's much better that you get them to your house. If they're going to do the stuff, make sure it's in your house, because at least there's a controlled environment. At least, there. Okay, I hear that argument, but I don't buy it. I will not allow ungodliness in my house. And if you want to live your life that way, then you need to learn, as my child, that if you want to sin and you choose to sin, sin has consequences. Now you need to make your decision. I think you are doing a far greater service to your kids to show them there are boundaries we don't cross, and we will not cross them as a family. And if you want to, you need to go and cross them somewhere else. So this is what I'm seeing in the life of Nehemiah. He stands firm against this third threat to the fruitfulness of his life, the temptation to sin and allow sin within the midst of them. Fourthly, the temptation to selfishness. Chapter 5, 14 to 19, Nehemiah gives of his own money to support those who have been the victims of injustice from others. And he supports them. And he doesn't take the salary that he had every right to draw. He didn't take the salary for himself. He just supported the people. One of the greatest threats to your fruitfulness in life will be selfish intentions. And so you've got to continually just ask yourself, am I doing this out of selfish ambition? Am I doing this to the hurt of others because I just want to enrich myself? Selfishness continually threatens us as people, and it will rob you of your godly future. Number 5, legal threats. And I mean, so here we see they write this letter to the king and trying to get the king to force them to stop. And he stands firm against it. He says nothing. That what you've written in that letter is not true. And we're carrying on with our work. They resisted the legal threatenings of their enemies. And boy, I tell you, this is a huge issue in the church of our day. In the Western world, Christianity is under fire. And there are, in fact, in South Africa right now, there's a doctor who is currently defending himself in court because he refused to perform an abortion because he's a Christian, and abortion is murder. So he will not perform an abortion, and now he's being taken to court by all of these liberal lobby groups. The same I know is true in America, and I assume the same is happening in England and Europe. The church is under threat. They're trying to make it illegal for you to discipline your children using spanking. And they're trying to make spanking or smacking your kids when they're toddlers equal to child abuse, to try to rob us of the right to raise our children as the Bible says we should. If you spare the rod, says the Bible, you will spoil the child. You will create a little rebel if you do not drive the foolishness of rebellion from them and teach them respect for authority when they are toddlers. Boy, that's going to be an unpopular sentiment, but legal threats. We need to pray against these things as the church. We need to fight against them. And then, sixth and the final threat that Nehemiah had to face was the threat of the temptation to sin himself. And that we see in chapter 6, verses 10 and 12. This guy tempts him to go into the temple. Let me read that to you. Afterward I came to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel, who was a secret informer. And he said, "Let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. Indeed, at night they will come to kill you." And I said, "Should such a man as I flee? And who is there, such as I, who would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in." Then I perceived that God had not sent him at all, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. So Nehemiah didn't even realize that this was a temptation for him from the devil to sin. At first he just thought this was a friend, this is a godly person who's encouraging me to flee with him into the temple and close the doors so that I'll be kept safe and don't let anybody else in there. But something about it didn't sit right with him. He wasn't allowed to go into the temple. As Uzziah the king had gone into the temple and had become a leper for the rest of his life. And so even though he felt the threat, man, they're coming to kill me, yet I'm not willing to go into the temple. No, I'd rather die. And this is a great lesson for those of us who want to achieve great things with our lives. You will be threatened with the subtle temptations of Satan to sin through fear. Maybe to cheat on your taxes because I'm scared or I don't have enough money, or it's some kind of temptation to unethical behavior or sinful behavior. When something doesn't sit right with you, my friend, just take it easy. Think about it and say no. Be willing to take the consequences. Come what may, refuse to sin. And so here we have the 6 threats to the fruitfulness of the life of Nehemiah. The threat to be discouragement. The threat of physical violence. The threat of ungodliness in the midst of the people. The threat of selfishness. the threat of legal threats and political pressure, and then the threat to personally sin. And these are the things that we need to fight against so that the kingdom of God may come amongst us too. So God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow.